Iran had calculated that controlling the Strait of Hormuz was its ultimate insurance policy against Western pressure. However, a series of Ukrainian drone strikes deep inside Iranian territory, carried out in coordination with Gulf state intelligence, has shattered that assumption in less than 72 hours. In the waters that carry 21 million barrels of oil every single day, the balance of power has shifted in ways that Beijing did not see coming and cannot afford to ignore. What you are about to witness is not a footnote in this war. It is the opening move of a completely new chapter in the global contest for energy dominance, and the country that made it happen is not the United States, not Israel, not Saudi Arabia. It is Ukraine. The images you are about to see on your screens show the aftermath of an event that defense ministries from Washington to Beijing are still attempting to fully process. What you see is a shoreline, a burning naval installation on the Iranian coast near Bandar Abbas, and the unmistakable silhouette of Ukrainian-designed fiber-optic-controlled FPV drones recovered from the wreckage of the IRGC's Coastal Command facility. But that is not the most shocking detail. There are two main factors that have suddenly made the Strait of Hormuz navigable for the first time in months, and the second factor involves a level of strategic coordination between Kyiv and Riyadh that almost no one predicted. We will explain this in the later parts of the video. For now, we must go back to the moment when it all began. Now we descend to that precise starting point, a classified intelligence exchange conducted in late March 2026. According to preliminary reports corroborated by analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian military intelligence operatives provided Gulf Cooperation Council partners with targeting packages developed over 18 months of drone warfare experience against hardened Russian infrastructure. These were not generic datasets. They were refined methodologies for striking reinforced command nodes, radar arrays, and waterborne patrol systems using low-signature autonomous platforms specifically engineered to defeat electronic countermeasures. The Ukrainians had learned these techniques destroying Russian Black Sea Fleet assets in Sevastopol and Novorossiysk. They had learned them the hard way. Now they were applying that education in ways that served Kyiv's own strategic interests enormously. The context matters enormously here. For the previous 4 months, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had been conducting what size analysts described as a deliberate chokepoint harassment campaign, interdicting commercial vessels, trailing tankers, and positioning fast attack craft within striking range of the narrowest passage of the strait, a corridor measuring only 34 kilometers across at its most constrained point. Iranian leadership had made no secret of their intention. Senior IRGC commanders stated publicly that any further Western arms deliveries to Israel would result in complete closure of the strait. At 21 million barrels of daily throughput, representing roughly 20% of global oil consumption, that threat carried the weight of civilizational consequence. The world listened. The world hesitated. Ukraine did not hesitate. Here is where the technical picture becomes remarkable, and it is critical to understand exactly what Ukrainian engineers contributed to this operation, because it explains why Beijing's response has been so unusually subdued. Ukrainian fiber-optic FPV drones differ fundamentally from the GPS-guided systems that Iran's electronic warfare infrastructure was specifically designed to defeat. Russian investment in signal jamming technology along the Ukrainian front had inadvertently created the world's most advanced testbed for drone countermeasure development. Every platform Ukraine built had to survive the most sophisticated disruption environment on Earth. The result was a weapons system that operates on a hardened physical tether rather than a radio frequency, making it completely immune to the S-300 derived jamming networks that Iran had deployed around Bandar Abbas and the Keshem Island naval installations. According to Defense Ministry statements corroborated by open-source satellite imagery analyzed by Bellingcat researchers, 3 separate IRGC coastal radar arrays and 1 fast-attack craft maintenance facility were struck across a period of 41 hours. Iranian air defense did not register the threat until detonation. But that is not the most shocking detail. The truly chilling element of what Ukraine has engineered here is not the technology itself. It is the diplomatic architecture underneath it. This brings us to the strategic implication layer, the level at which what appears to be a tactical drone strike transforms into something that will reshape alliance structures for a decade. Ukraine's provision of targeting intelligence and drone methodology to Gulf partners was not conducted without calculation. In exchange, Kyiv received something it has needed desperately since the beginning of 2026: guaranteed access to Gulf Cooperation Council intermediary financial channels that bypass secondary sanctions complications, and more critically, a formal commitment from 3 GCC member states to accelerate artillery shell production contracts for Ukrainian-compatible calibers. According to reports from Radio Free Europe's defense desk, the exchange represents the first formal military economic partnership between Ukraine and the Gulf since the full-scale invasion began. Kyiv did not merely help open a waterway. Kyiv traded its hardest-won expertise for a logistical lifeline that extends the war by months. The chain of operational consequences follows an almost mechanical logic. Iranian fast attack craft cannot operate effectively without the radar and command infrastructure that Ukraine helped destroy. Without persistent maritime harassment, commercial tanker operators reassess transit risk. When transit risk falls, insurance underwriters lower coverage premiums. When premiums fall, tanker bookings recover. The Strait of Hormuz does not need to be physically reopened. It only needs to stop feeling like a trap. In the 72 hours following the strikes, Lloyd's of London updated its war risk category for the Strait for the first time in 4 months. That single actuarial adjustment released approximately 60 vessels that had been staging outside the operational zone. 400,000 additional barrels of crude reached global markets in a single week. Oil futures fell $3.12 in one trading session. Now let us take our eyes off the strait itself and turn them toward Beijing, because China's reaction to these events is where this story truly becomes extraordinary. China's relationship with Iran is governed by a 25-year cooperation agreement signed in 2021, under which Beijing committed to approximately $400 billion of infrastructure and energy investment in exchange for discounted crude supply. That agreement is not a casual commercial arrangement. It is the foundation of China's energy independence strategy, a deliberate attempt to insulate Beijing from the kind of maritime pressure that Western naval power could theoretically apply in the South China Sea or the Indian Ocean. If Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, China benefits from a strategic leverage point it does not itself need to maintain at military cost. Iran becomes a proxy guardian of energy access. It is an elegant arrangement. Ukraine just made it look fragile. The picture we see today is almost an exact replica of the strategic miscalculations that preceded the Winter War of 1939, when a larger power assumed a smaller, embattled neighbor would remain passive and narrowly focused on its own survival. Ukraine is not a narrowly focused actor. Ukraine is a country that has spent 4 years developing asymmetric capabilities precisely because it understood it would never win a symmetrical contest. Those capabilities are now projecting into theaters that have nothing formally to do with the Russian front. That realization appears to be landing in Beijing with considerable force. According to German intelligence reports cited by European security analysts, Chinese diplomatic communications in the 48 hours following the Bandar Abbas strikes showed unusual urgency in backchannel exchanges with Iranian leadership, strongly suggesting Beijing was not forewarned and did not approve. Trade volume between China and Iran had already fallen to approximately $228 billion in the previous calendar year, a decline of approximately 7% from peak figures, due to secondary sanctions pressure. Beijing can absorb reduced Iranian crude by sourcing on the open market. What Beijing cannot absorb is a precedent in which a Western-aligned, war-hardened state with advanced drone expertise begins operating as a force multiplier for Gulf states that are themselves reassessing their relationship with Chinese investment. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund has been in formal conversations with Ukrainian reconstruction partners since January 2026. The United Arab Emirates signed a dual-use technology sharing memorandum with Kyiv in February. China's Gulf relationships are not collapsing, but they are being complicated in ways that Beijing finds deeply uncomfortable. With the accession of Finland and Sweden into NATO, the Baltic Sea became a NATO lake. Now, with Ukraine projecting force into the Persian Gulf strategic orbit, something structurally similar is beginning to take shape in the Middle East's maritime geography, and it is happening without a single NATO warship moving an inch closer to the strait. Now we must look at the human dimension of what these events mean, because the strategic picture, as compelling as it is, does not capture the full weight of what is happening to the individuals caught inside it. The man behind the wheel of an IRGC fast attack craft that turned back toward port on March 29th is a soldier. The expression on his face, captured on drone footage now circulating among open-source intelligence analysts, is not fear exactly. It is the expression of someone who has just discovered that the system he trusted to protect him, the radar umbrella, the command structure, the institutional certainty of Iranian defensive superiority in home waters, has been quietly and methodically dismantled by adversaries he was never briefed to expect. Ukraine is not supposed to be a threat in the Persian Gulf. That category error, the assumption that an army fighting for its own survival cannot simultaneously reshape conflicts elsewhere, is precisely what made the strike so effective. Inside Kyiv, the strategic logic is stark and unsentimental. Ukrainian leadership has stated publicly that the country intends to become a defense technology exporter capable of sustaining its own reconstruction through military-economic partnerships. The Gulf operation, whether officially acknowledged or not, is the proof of concept for that vision. Ukrainian drone engineers did not travel to Bandar Abbas. They transferred knowledge, packaged it as targeting data and operational doctrine, and allowed regional partners to execute. The result carries Ukrainian engineering, but no Ukrainian fingerprints at the operational level. It is, according to analysts at RUSI referenced in a recent Financial Times investigation, the most sophisticated example of capability transfer between a frontline combatant and a regional third party in contemporary military history. Russian leadership has noted all of this with what appears to be genuine alarm. Putin's strategy is currently built entirely on the logic of Western exhaustion. He trusts declining poll numbers in Washington, Berlin, and Paris more than his generals on the front line. But Ukraine projecting influence into the Gulf disrupts the central narrative that Kyiv is a dependent, contained actor requiring constant Western subsidy to survive. Every Gulf petrodollar flowing toward Ukrainian reconstruction contracts is a dollar that reduces Kyiv's dependence on Western political will. That is a direct threat to the attrition logic underpinning Moscow's entire strategic posture. Russia threatening the world with nuclear missiles while butter disappears from store shelves behind locked cabinets had a certain terrible coherence when Ukraine appeared desperate. That coherence is dissolving in real time. What comes next? The coming months will be among the most consequential in the realignment of Middle Eastern security architecture since the Abraham Accords. Several trajectories are now in motion simultaneously, and understanding their intersection is essential. In the short term, Iran will attempt to reconstitute the Bandar Abbas radar network. Iranian engineers are capable, and the infrastructure reconstitution timeline is estimated at 60 to 90 days, according to preliminary assessments from analysts tracking commercial satellite imagery. However, Ukrainian partners in the Gulf have now demonstrated the operational capability to strike that infrastructure once, which means every dollar Iran reinvests carries ongoing attrition risk. Iran must either accept permanent vulnerability or dramatically escalate its response, and neither option serves Tehran's current political calculus against a backdrop of intensifying internal factional pressures around executive authority. In the medium term, Beijing faces a choice it has successfully deferred for 3 years. China cannot simultaneously position itself as the guarantor of Iranian strategic ambition and as a neutral economic partner for Gulf states actively working to constrain that ambition. The fence is becoming narrower. Saudi Arabia's decision to enable Ukrainian-derived technology within operational frameworks that directly degraded Iranian capability will not be forgotten in Tehran. Beijing's failure to either prevent or respond to that decision will not be forgotten in Riyadh. Will China lean toward its Belt and Road commitments with Iran, or pivot toward the deeper economic integration with Gulf sovereign wealth that its domestic growth projections increasingly require? That question stretching across the Persian Gulf may be the most important unanswered strategic calculation of 2026. In the long term, Ukraine is ceding something that extends far beyond its own borders. A country with no formal power projection capability, no carrier groups, no overseas bases, fighting a survival war against a nuclear-armed adversary. has just demonstrated that asymmetric expertise transferred through intelligence partnerships can reshape a waterway carrying 20% of the world's oil. We are at the end of the slowly phase. The suddenly phase, in terms of how quickly Ukraine's role in global security architecture can evolve, may be much closer than anyone in Moscow or Beijing had calculated. This is the beginning of a great strategic realignment that will reshape the global balance of power in ways that will still be visible long after the guns in eastern Ukraine finally fall silent. Only time will tell how Iran reconstitutes its posture, whether China is ultimately forced to choose sides explicitly, and whether Ukraine's Gulf partnership deepens into something that permanently restructures Kyiv's post-war economic future. But one thing is already certain. Putin set out to transform Ukraine into a subordinate state permanently anchored to Russian will. Today, Ukraine is projecting capability into waterways that determine the fate of global energy markets, signing military economic agreements with Gulf sovereigns, and forcing Beijing into strategic calculations that were never supposed to involve Kyiv at all. Iran had calculated the Strait of Hormuz was its ultimate leverage. However, a frontline combatant with 4 years of asymmetric warfare experience just demonstrated to the entire world that the most decisive weapons are not missiles or carrier groups. They are expertise, adaptability, and the determination to project both far beyond the battlefield where you were supposed to stay contained. What are your thoughts on Ukraine's emerging role as a global defense technology exporter? And do you believe Beijing will be forced to choose sides more explicitly before the end of this year? Share your analysis in the comments section below. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and like our video so that we can continue bringing you the analysis that goes where mainstream coverage will not. The strategic picture is moving faster than any single headline can capture, and we will be here for every development. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.